Hi, I'm Amy, and welcome to a chronological study of the life of Jesus. Join me as we study the Gospels in order using John MacArthur's book, One Perfect Life. Welcome to Lesson 39. In Lesson 38, we were talking about Jesus being in Capernaum and how he had been healing and doing all the things, and then he goes out and he prays. And when he comes back and the disciples call him back because there's more people there to be healed, he moves on to other areas of Galilee, other towns, and he begins to heal and teach and preach in the area around Galilee. So the last lesson was more a summary of his ministry in Galilee and what he had been doing in this area around the Sea of Galilee and what he'd been doing there. And just kind of how he was healing everyone that was coming to him and how he was teaching and preaching and gaining fame that way. Well, this lesson, 39, is Jesus' second call of the four. And the four that we're talking about are Peter, Andrew, James, and John. It's the first four of his disciples, the inner circle there of his disciples. And he's encountered them before and he's called them. I think it's in lesson 35 where he has called them and told them he would make them fishers of men. And they get out of the boat and they follow him. And then at some point they've returned to Capernaum and gone back to fishing. That's their livelihood. That's how they make their money. And he's been traveling around and doing whatever. Well, this lesson is the one where he makes his permanent call of them. And he tells them, to come with him. And they don't ever really go back fishing. They follow him around for the rest of his ministry. After he dies, there is a point where they do go back fishing for a certain time, and then Jesus meets them again right in the same spot and at Galilee, and that's when they never go back fishing again. They then continue the ministry and build the church and do all the things, and that's all in the book of Acts. But there is a time where he calls them and they continue to go back fishing. But for Jesus' ministry on earth, this is the time when he calls them and they follow him for that roughly 3-year span. So this is that calling. This is recorded in the book of Luke, chapter 5. And we're going to read it. And then I've got 5 points that I hope to make pretty quick. So let's read first. So it was, as the multitude pressed about him to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret and saw 2 boats standing by the lake. But the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets. Then he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the multitudes from the boat. When he had stopped speaking, he said to Simon, "Launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." But Simon answered and said to him, "Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net." And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats, so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will catch men." So when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. So the first point I want to make is about the setting. Okay, so what is happening in this scene? You've got Jesus in that first year of his Galilean ministry. You've got Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and they're around the Sea of Galilee. They've been in Capernaum, and now Jesus is around the Sea of Galilee. He's not necessarily with these guys, though. They were out fishing all night, and they were bringing their boats in, and they're there mending and washing their nets from the night before to be ready for the next night fishing, and Jesus comes along. And Jesus is being pressed in by a crowd who he's trying to teach them. He's trying to talk to them and instruct them, and they're pressing in on him, and he's not able to be as effective because He's being pressed in upon. And so what he does is he sees boats there, and he gets into a boat, which happens, not by coincidence, we know this, to be Simon Peter's. And so he tells Simon Peter to push him out a little bit away from the shore to give him some separation from the crowd so that he can teach. And Simon Peter gets in the boat and pushes Jesus out a little bit so the people can't crowd Jesus, but he can still teach the crowd. Okay, so he's at the Sea of Galilee, which is also known as Gennesaret, Tiberias, Chinnereth, and I think those are the names that are known by. So about 4 or 5 names that it's known by, or 3 or 4 names. Galilee, Gennesaret, Tiberias, and Chinnereth. Yeah, 4 names. And they had not been called to public ministry, like permanent ministry with him yet, but he was familiar with them. He had just healed Peter's mother-in-law in the previous. They had just gone around doing some Galilean ministry, and here he is teaching, but they're not necessarily with him during this time. So I don't know if maybe he was at Galilee because of the sea right there where they were, because maybe he'd been out with them the night before. I don't believe that's the case. It doesn't really indicate that. It indicates that he's in the same place they're in, and they're independently there for different reasons, which we know the motive of God. God has a plan. He has a plan. He's right there where he is because Simon Peter is there and the disciples are there, and he's going to call them. So that's why he's there, but they're independent at this time. And he gets into Simon Peter's boat, and asks him to push out, and he's going to teach. So that is what is going on. He teaches, and then after he's finished teaching, he then turns to Peter to have a conversation with Peter and ask Peter to go out deeper and fish, which is something he's going to do. So Jesus was very popular with the crowds with his teaching here. They've liked all the teaching and the preaching and the healing that he's been doing, and they're following around, but he's purposely here. The focus here is not on his teaching the crowd and what he was doing there. His focus in this scene is more about what he's doing with the disciples. So that's why this instance is recorded, because God has a plan to call these men to a permanent, life-changing ministry that will impact more people than they could even understand. And that's why Jesus is there, because God has a plan. So the second point is Simon Peter, Simon the fisherman. So Simon was known as Simon, and then Jesus changes his name to Peter, the rock. And we tend to know him either by Peter or Simon Peter. So he's a fisherman. That's his trade. And his brother Andrew, and then James and John, they were all partners right there in the Sea of Galilee, right there near Capernaum. And they would fish in the Sea of Galilee, and then they would bring in their catch. And the way that they would do it is the fishing would take place at night. And they had these really big nets, and they would use torches, and they would go up on the shallow part of the land the water, because the fish would go shallow at night, and then during the day they would go back deep into the deep waters. Well, their nets could only reach so deep, so they would fish at night when the fish were in the shallow areas, and they would use the torches to light the sea so that they could see in the water and see the fish, and then they would cast their nets out, and it would, with the weights and everything, would scoop them up, and be able to bring in the fish. So they would throw out their nets to bring up the fish that were in the area their nets could catch. So that's what they had been doing all night, and that's kind of how Peter made his living. And now he's there mending his nets, and he's asked by Jesus. Jesus gets in his boat, and he tells him, just get me a little bit away from this crowd so I can teach. And he does. He does. Now, Peter is familiar with some of the miracles Jesus has done, his teaching. Peter's been around him enough. Peter's very familiar with Jesus and who he is, and I know this guy, I can help him out. They're friendly at this point. And so the point I want to make about Simon Peter here, fishing in his everyday life, is that he encounters Jesus again, minding his own business, doing his job, doing what he's called to do, his routine day-to-day life, and Jesus is there. Jesus shows up where he is and encounters him, and that, Jesus meets us where we are, that Peter is going about his daily life, doing what he knows he's supposed to do, and Jesus meets him there. And that's the same thing Jesus does for us. We're not always meeting Jesus for the first time at church. We're meeting Jesus every single day in our lives. As we go somewhere, we know Jesus goes with us. And as we are in the middle of washing dishes and taking care of the kids and working our jobs and being a family member, Jesus meets us in our day-to-day life and what we're doing and encounters us and has something very special for us. And he is calling us in those moments to follow him. He is calling us in those ordinary, routine, day-to-day, mundane lives that we're living. He is calling us to follow him. He is calling us to the mission that he is on, to be fishers of men. So even in our day-to-day life, we are still on mission for God. Even in the mundane, the simple things that we do all the time, even in the routines, we are being called by Jesus. We are met by Jesus in those moments and asked to be fishers of men. So we can still disciple. We can still make a difference even when we're not in the church mindset, when we're not gathered as a group there for the purpose of worshiping God. We can still worship God. We can still encounter Jesus because Jesus is with us everywhere that we go. He said, I will be with you always. So he's always with us, and we are always meant to bring God glory and to proclaim Jesus to people, even in the midst of the mundane. So Jesus is always with us. That's the main takeaway. He meets us where we are. And the third point is that Jesus commands and Simon Peter responds. Okay, so Jesus commands him then to launch out into the deep, and there's a way Peter responds. Now, Jesus tells him to go deep fishing, and that's what we were talking about, how if he goes out in the deep, his nets don't really reach. The fish are in the deep during the day, but your nets don't really reach, and you can't really catch them that well. So what Jesus was telling Simon Peter did not make sense as a fisherman. That's not how we do it. That's not what you would normally... I can tell you're not a fisherman because that's not how that normally would be. If I do that, that sounds silly, right? And so that was a fruitless idea in Peter's mind. Like, that's not going to work. But what does Peter's response tell us? He calls Jesus Master, first of all. And so what is that? Why does he call him Master? And I think it's because he's been familiar with Jesus' miracles and familiar with his teaching and the way that Jesus operates and works. And he understands Jesus is not on his level. He's Master, Rabbi. Okay, teacher. All right, Master. That is not the way we're supposed to do it, But what does Peter do? He says, these are the reasons why it won't work. We've toiled all night and we didn't catch anything. That's, the reason. Peter's not necessarily being rebellious or sassy in this moment. He's just giving the reasons why this is what we've been doing, though, God, and it hasn't worked. But he exhibits trust here. He says, but, because you've asked, I'll do it. Where does he say that? Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net. So, all right, Jesus, it doesn't make sense, and we haven't caught anything. It's not the time to catch fish, but if you're asking me, I'll do it. And so I think Peter's response shows that even though Jesus' request goes against, in Peter's mind, what he should be doing, he has enough trust and faith in Jesus as Master, and Jesus as in his authority, in his power to, I'll give it a shot and I'll do what you tell me to do because I believe that you can do it. It goes against all the customs, but I'm going to trust you and I'm going to do it. And so I think it shows a faith in Jesus, and it shows that they had a relationship and an understanding here that Peter, from what we can know about Peter, he was outspoken. He was a bit brash. He didn't really hold back. And yet with Jesus here, he didn't tell Jesus, that's not going to work. He kind of complies pretty easily, I feel like. So Peter demonstrates his faith in Jesus by being obedient. So our faith is evident in our obedience to God and doing the work even when he didn't understand and didn't think it would work, and it went against everything he thought was supposed to work as a fisherman. So obedience to God may not always make sense to us. It may not always go with the flow of what we think is supposed to happen. And if I do this, I don't see how that's going to work out, But but it may not always make sense, may not always be popular, and it might require some work from us, because Peter then had to throw his nets out again and do some work. And sometimes that's what obedience to God is effort on our part and a trust in what doesn't seem to make sense. What our eyes cannot see and what our mind cannot understand, we trust it and we act on it. And that's what God wants from us. He wants our obedience. That's what he commands, is our obedience. Now, what happens here? So Peter obeys. And then point number 4 is the miracle of the fish. God provides in this moment. Peter was rewarded with a great catch. So big of a catch that he had to bring the other boat in. That the net was so full it was breaking. They got the other boat in. They loaded up the other boat, the partners, Peter, Andrew, James, John, right? They loaded up the other boat. The boats began to sink because they're so full of fish, all right? And then Simon sees it, and he just falls to his knees right there at Jesus' knees and his feet. And he says, depart from me, like, don't be in my presence because I'm a sinful man, Lord. And so why did Peter respond that way? That's an interesting response. So what we see here is that they get such a miracle of fish. It's so many that the boats can't hold it. So Peter's obedience led to this miracle, this overflowing abundance of everything that he had lacked from the night before. God provided. And God rewards our obedience. He calls us and he rewards us. And he provides for our obedience. That's the application here, is the understanding, even when it doesn't make sense, but when we obey, we are rewarded. Just like in the previous couple lessons, we were talking about what happens when we are disobedient. We get consequences and punishment, and things don't work out, and we're disciplined. But when we are obedient, God rewards our obedience. We are rewarded. So he provides, and then Peter falls down. And why did Peter have that response? Why did Peter fall down? And I really think that Peter in that moment recognized Jesus as more than master. I think he recognized his absolute authority and power, and he saw it. I mean, he had seen him heal, he had seen him teach, but in that moment, he controlled the animals, the fish, and the moment, and it just was something. He was giving Peter something that he had needed financially from the night before. He was this windfall of what would be financing for Peter. And I think it was a series of things that added up to that moment as well. And in light of that, he sees Jesus for who he is, but he also sees himself for who he is. So in that moment, he's faced with Jesus' holiness, Jesus as Messiah, Jesus as something other than, which means depart from me because I'm sinful. And he saw that Jesus was working with him, but all Peter could focus on was his own sin and his own unworthiness. He knew he didn't deserve for Jesus to be working with him like that, for Jesus to be providing for him like that. You don't know the status of his heart and what he might have been thinking. We know what he said, but he could have been doubting. We don't know. But when Jesus does the miracle, he says, I am not worthy of this. I realize that I am not deserving of you doing this for me, of you working with me. So in light of Jesus' power and authority, Peter saw his own sinfulness. And he knew he wasn't worthy. And he knew that Jesus was working with his heart. And Peter didn't deserve it. And he knew it. And so this is really similar. He's using these fish. This is something else I want to point out. It's really similar to in John chapter 21, after Jesus has died and they all go back fishing and they haven't caught anything, and there's a guy on the shore and he's calling out to him, did you catch anything? Let's see if I got it. Do you have any fish? And they're like, no, we haven't caught anything. And he said, try on the right side of the boat. So they throw the net out on the right side and they caught a great number of fish, so great they couldn't even haul it in. And it was in that moment, which is so similar to what's going on here, that John's eyes are open and he tells Peter it's Jesus. And Peter says, oh, it's Jesus. And Peter jumps into the water and swims to the shore to be with Jesus. So it's something about meeting these men in the mundane, in the day-to-day, in the providing for what they were doing, working right alongside them, something they were experts at. Jesus was even better at it. And it was something about meeting them right there in their wheelhouse and what they enjoyed doing and what they did for a living and what they did all day long, and Jesus jumping in and doing it better and providing for them without the struggle, and they saw it. It opened their eyes. It was something so familiar, and he was shaking it up for them, and it was like, oh, that's Jesus. He uses it twice, the fish, to reveal to them that he is Messiah, to reveal to them that he is special. And it for whatever reason, it stuck with the fishermen when Jesus began messing with the fish, And so I don't know, there's something in our lives when Jesus hits the sensitive places that it speaks to us. When he hits us where we're needing something, it speaks to us. When he enters into the place that is so familiar to us and we notice that it's him, it speaks to us. And so Jesus is very personal to them in this moment. The miracle of the fish may not have worked on anybody else, but it worked for these guys because that's what it took to reach these people. So, God calls and God provides. And then Peter responds like this, that I'm sinful. But the fifth point I've got is from now on. So he says, depart from me, for I'm sinful. And Jesus says to him back, do not be afraid. And so Peter's fallen down. He's not worthy. He doesn't even want Jesus to be around him, because your holiness makes me realize how bad I am, how sinful, how broken I am. And Jesus says, don't worry, don't be afraid. And he's in essence saying, I can cover your sin. Don't be afraid. From now on, you will catch men. And so from now on, there's no fear now. There's only the future. Jesus, as Peter's focused on his sin and his past and his unworthiness, Jesus is like, I've taken care of that, and I will take care of that. Because I will die. I will be the perfect sacrifice. I will take care of your sin. But your future is what's important. From now on, you're going to catch men. Your past, if we apply it to ourselves, our past is something that will always be there. But Jesus' death on the cross, his blood, his atoning blood, is more than enough to cover that. It is more than enough to bring us back to a relationship with God. And he is less concerned about that once we believe and we follow him. He's got that part taken care of. It's the future. It's the service that he's looking for. Don't be so bogged down in your sinful past and what's holding you back and your unworthiness. Focus on that he is worthy to be followed. The service and what I can give to him and what he deserves is more important than the fact that I don't deserve it. And so he repeats this call for them to be fishers of men, like he did in lesson 35. He repeats this call for them to be fishers of men. So Jesus has taken care of the past and the sin by his death. We don't fear that anymore. Now we are alive in Christ. We are new creations. We have a mission and a goal. We are to focus on our future and our service with God. Be fishers of men. Your past is not something that should handicap you. Are you handicapped by your past? Or do you accept the forgiveness that God has given through Jesus and move forward into your future, into the service, into the glorifying of the Father that saved you in your obedience? And so God cares about our obedience. Once we've accepted Jesus' atoning sacrifice, the sin's not something that's holding us back. God, as far as the east is from the west, is how far he separates that. He doesn't remember our sins anymore. He's not focused on our sin. He's focused on our obedience. And okay, my child, we've taken care of that. Let's go forward together. And that's what he's focused on. And let that be an encouragement to you today, not to be caught up on the why I can't, why this won't work, why I'm not good enough, and trust in God that He's got a plan, that He cares about your service and obedience, that He's got a better way for you to move forward, that trust that and understand that He's got it worked out, and you just walk in it. We are saved to walk in the works that He's called for us to walk in. And so that's pretty much what I've got for this lesson, that Jesus called all 4 disciples, his inner circle here, to permanent disciplehood, I guess you would say here, to permanent discipleship. And disciples make disciples. So He's asking them to come alongside and be a disciple. And I'm going to make you fishers of men. You, from now on, you're going to catch men. This is it for the boat. Now you're going to follow me, and we're going to make more disciples. And so Jesus teaches and then does a miracle to demonstrate His power to Peter. And these 4 disciples, that was the authority and the worthiness of this Messiah. And they followed Him from then on. And that's kind of the story of the second call of these disciples, is that they leave the boat. They forsook all after that. Fishing wasn't their main goal anymore in life. They were looking at making disciples, at following this Messiah and making His name great and bringing more people in. And I don't know what you can take away from this lesson. I don't know if it's the fact that understanding that sometimes what God's calling us to, obedience, may not make sense, but we're supposed to do it. And that we're rewarded for our obedience, and that God cares. Once we are saved, once we are redeemed by the blood of Jesus, that sin is not our identity anymore. We are to be known by our love for one another. We are to be known by our obedience to God. We are to be known by the way that we serve God and bring Him glory. That is what matters to Him more in that moment, because He remembers our sin no more. And He tells the woman, when He's telling her, go and sin no more. Sin no more. Don't just go and sin no more and follow me and be my disciples. And so don't let sin be what handicaps you and stops you. And don't let your I can't do it because of this, or it won't work because of this, be the reason that holds you back from serving God and from trusting Him and from following Him and from doing what He's asked you to do. Sometimes we're called to missions that are bigger than what we can understand, and I don't know how it's going to work. It's going to be a lot of work, and I don't really know how forget it. God will provide. God will take care. You just obey. You walk the path of obedience, and all the pieces, God will take care of it. We are called to obedience. He will handle the outcome. And so again, I don't know what you can share with somebody else to share the love of Jesus, to share that God has a plan and a purpose, and that we are to walk in obedience. But that's what I've got for this lesson. Thank you so much for watching it. We're going to talk next video about another healing, and then another healing. And so more about Jesus' Galilean ministry and the healings. That's what we're going to get into in the next video. So thank you so much for watching this one. I'll see you in that one.